for survivors and the leaders who support them. I'm your host, Kelly Humphries, a survivor of child sexual abuse, author, advocate, a little bit of a lover of all things outdoors, and I have over 15 years of law enforcement experience. So Off the Cuff with Kel is a diverse and inclusive show, basically targeting areas of growth and leadership through trauma, help and healing, prevention and protection, stories of courage and survival, and a deep look at what it means to be a survivor. Some of the content that you will see tonight may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Child sexual abuse, domestic violence, trauma, and some other related themes are likely to be discussed. So, to kick off this show with the wonderful Anna Bowden, I'm so excited. And Anna has a heart connection for her work. So I'm just going to introduce her, guys. She's the CEO of ICMEC, which is the International Centre for Missing and Exploited Children Australia. She has her own story of survival, and she is the epitome of triumph over tragedy. She's impacted change across governments through the world through her social impact strategy, consulting, and she has a deep understanding of governance that's put her way at the top of her game. She's a passionate leader, a mum of 2 babies, and an absolutely inspiring human being. I'm so excited and so blessed to have you here, Anna. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Kel. I don't know that the introduction was totally accurate. I would have played it down a bit, but honestly, you're such an inspiration to me. So thank you for having me on. It's a true honor.
I'm like proper excited. Guys, just so you know, like the conversations that I've had with Anna over the last week have been mind-blowing and empowering. And ICMEC as an organization in Australia is like, I'm just going to say it. There's even a wonderful lady, Fran, who's sitting in the background helping to run this live show courtesy of ICMEC Australia. So I'm just so grateful for the partnerships, the connections, the people just that continue to show up in this space when you continue to put yourself out there. So I'm just grateful for you, Anna, grateful for ICMEC Australia, and so excited for what we're going to talk about tonight.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. And I should disclose to everyone too that partly Kel and I really kicked it off. She wrote to me and said, would you talk here and would you tell your story? And I was like, I've never done this before, Kel. So you're going to have to kind of hold my hand a bit. I've never really spoken publicly about this. So you're all going to hear it probably for the first time. And, you know, my full respect to Kel, as she said, we really kicked it off, and I feel safe telling it with her. So thank you. Thank you for taking me on this journey.
Well, we haven't started yet, but it's going to be a journey we get to take together. So it's really exciting and, you know, very courageous of you and very brave to take that step. So I fully acknowledge that, and I thank you for that courage. So on that note, it is really important for anyone who is listening to feel safe, seen and heard when you are talking about stories that are really tough. So again, we want this to be a safe space. So if you're out there listening, you do have the opportunity to send your chats in. So just please make them as respectful as possible. We'd love to hear your encouraging words as well, just to keep us going, because this is going to be a very powerful conversation. So starting with you, Anna, obviously I am a survivor myself. A lot of people know my story. I was abused from the age of 8 all the way through to 15 by my uncle, who was very close to our family, very loved and respected in our family. And nobody knew what was going on for a very long time. He groomed us very powerfully. He groomed my parents, obviously, in order to have access to me. So, you know, it's a very difficult as a child growing up myself. And I know I've read just a little bit of a summary that you sent through to me. And wow, like you have such an inspiring story. So tell us a little bit about how it started.
Yeah. Thanks, Kel. So, you know, the real truth is I don't remember how young I was when it first started. I mean, obviously, as a young child, you don't have very clear memories of the early days. What I do know is that there were 2 people who abused me through my childhood. One was very close inside the family, and he was a boy. So he was 3 years older than me, and he had, you know, I don't want to go into too much detail about how close he was in the family, but he had access to me at any time that he needed to. And the abuse was on and off. It was, different levels of severity. Sometimes it was pretty bad. Sometimes it wasn't much. Like it was kind of okay, and you kind of handle it as a kid as much as you think at the time that's what you do. And so that went on for years, on and off. And I actually honestly thought that was kind of it. Like that was my story, and it was just something that, I don't know if you grappled with this, but when you experience these things, you do try and downplay it. I think in terms of like, so many worse things have happened to other people. But also that's a survival technique, right? Like you don't really want to face how bad it is. But I had, chronic, all the typical symptoms, chronic anxiety and depression and a whole bunch of chronic illnesses, in fact, throughout my life, and got, shunted into psychologists over the years and never really lasted very long with any of them, because they'd always say to me, like, your behavior is pretty textbook, child sexual assault history. Do you want to talk about that? Like, do you want to go into it? Do you want to, try and figure out what the memory is? I was like, oh, no, it's fine. Like, I know who it is. It's this boy. And, he was very close in the family. And that's cool. Like, let's just keep a lid on that, like, rather not know. And so I kind of thought that was it. And, there was a lot of broader dysfunction in the family that I had to deal with for my entire life. And then like a much bigger event became apparent to me. And here's the weird thing. It only really became apparent 2 years ago. And it was almost exactly 2 years ago. And I can remember the moment so vividly. So over the years, I had said to, my parents, in particular, really only my parents, like, why did I have to stay at that guy's house? So this was an older man. He was a family friend of my parents. And as I said, there was a bit of dysfunction. I think there was plenty of partying going on in the family. And, I said, why did I have to stay at his house? And why did I have to sleep in his bed? It felt so wrong and so gross. And I said that kind of on and off over the years. And they were just like, well, I'm sure it was nothing. Like, it's no big deal. And he used to take us out to a lot of activities, like all that grooming stuff that you just mentioned was there. Turns out I'm actually a pretty good ice skater now, because he took me ice skating all the time. And so, classic family friend was sort of doing the babysitting thing. So anyway, I knew that something had happened, but I didn't really have the full memory of it. And I would have been about age, I don't know what the age was. I really don't know, but I think maybe between 6 and 8 or something. And I think I stayed a couple of times, but again, it's foggy. So a couple of years ago, in the absolute pressure cooker that is COVID, like all of our mental health was just awful. I was on the treadmill because we're all locked down, and exercise has always been my coping strategy. And I was on the treadmill and I was listening to this other podcast, totally innocuous, right? Like I was probably nerding out on business strategy or something. And the narrator tells a story about how his younger baby sister was sexually abused by a stranger. So a guy turned up in the front yard and took this little girl into the back of the van. And it was just telling the story. And I literally was running at full pace because I was pretty ragey. And I fell off the treadmill, like, when your legs, like, they just spin off, and I fell off, I flew off the treadmill, and I just started vomiting. And it was just so clear to me, like how all these pieces added up, and not just, like why I stayed in his house and what happened in that house. Like the images were just like flooding at me in this way that was just awful. Like it was like I'd been thrown back into it, and I had to relive it. And I was vomiting, and then I went into the bathroom and I was like howling. I was absolutely hysterically crying and vomiting, all this kind of stuff. And I had at the time, my daughters were 1 and 3. So this is 2 years ago. And my husband came in, and I'm like sprawled out on the bathroom floor. And he just said to me, like, who died? Like, it's that guttural reaction of like, who died? And, it was the first time I ever had to vocalize it. And I was just frozen for a while. Like he just held me, and I was just like, I just couldn't say it. So it came out, and I said, there's this guy, and he did these things. And now I remember, like I was in the bed, and he told me, you don't tell your parents. And and this and that, and let me show you how grown-ups make love, and and that's like, they're the bits I remember. It's not clear, right? And that's been really a blessing in some ways, but it's also been quite difficult to not have very clear, like, okay, this happened and it went this far, but it didn't go that far, right? So I don't know. And I think that's fairly common. So, when it first happened, I was a bit like, this is so weird. Like, why would it come flooding back to me when I'm 37 years old? This doesn't make any sense. Like, and then the most amazing thing, I've got a very, very good friend who's a specialist in child sexual assault psychology. And she called me up like a couple of weeks after I'd had this epiphany. I hadn't said anything to anyone because I just wasn't ready. And she called me up and she was like, Anna, and it was the bravest conversation anyone's ever had with me. She's like, Anna, and excuse my language, tell me to fuck off if I'm going too far. I've booked you into the hospital, to the child sexual assault victims unit. There's an appointment at this time, at this day. She's like, go or don't go. And that's totally your choice, but I've booked you in and I think you need to talk to someone. And it was then that I said, okay, and I've checked with her first. I can say her name's Julie. So I said, Julie, like, this thing happened, and like surely you can tell me this is not real, right? Like, why would I remember it? She's like, Anna, most people do. And she's like, honestly, like, the more traumatic it is, the more likely you are to have blocked it out. Like, of course, like, the brain's doing its thing, right?
Yeah.
And of course, and she's like, and often people do kind of discover when they're in that high adrenaline, like running on a treadmill or doing something that's like the cortisol starts to release. And for whatever reason, there's a trigger. And for me, it was like a podcast, and it all just comes flooding back. And she's like, it's classic. Like, it's really classic. And so then she and I she helped me get into the right service and start talking with someone who was very much saying the same thing. Like, this is how it goes often. And I still had this like, oh God, please I just want to make it not true, right? Like, I just want to make it not true. And I didn't have the guts to kind of look him up and see what was going on. But I eventually, like months later, I fessed up to my sister, and she looked him up, and she just basically, she told me a while after, she wasn't sure if I could handle it. She said, the guy's in prison, and he's done this to multiple kids. She's like, I'm so sorry, but like, there's no way we can take this story back anymore. And that was it, right? And that's where we are.
Wow, there's so much to unpack in that, but thank you for sharing that. That's, again, that was your first time speaking it out loud, so I wish I could just give you a big hug, because that's just, very courageous. So much has happened in there. Like, did you find in the beginning, obviously, so it was peer-to-peer, there's not a lot of conversation around peer-to-peer child sexual assault, and it's very much not spoken about. But did you at any point in time, were you able to have a conversation with someone about what was going on with that person?
No. So that's not true. I think it's been raised quite a lot. And I think there was, like, this is the hard thing, right? And I think this is kind of what you're getting at, is that, like, it was spoken about a lot, but it was also like, there's always, like, not always, but there's often this kind of like, oh, that's just kids being kids, right? Like, that's just kids exploring and developing. And I'm like, no, like, there were times when he would be physically really, really brutal, like tie me into the bed type brutal, right? And it wasn't just kids exploring. It was like, there's no way any child can give consent, right? But it wasn't like it wasn't even a both way pathway, right? Like, it was I'm going to dominate you, and you're going to know that I am going to make your life hell. And from what I understand too, like, it wasn't just me that he was doing that to. So he had a fairly traumatic childhood himself, but there were other kids that were constantly kind of honestly petrified of him. He was pretty scary.
Wow. Thank you again. That's more obviously going deeper and deeper as we have this conversation. And I think when you're a kid, you're in that situation, you go into those trauma responses of fight, flight, fear, fawn. You know, and we often sit there and we blame ourselves almost. I mean, I know for myself that I fawn. I fell into that fawning pattern because it kept me safe. You know, I know, and what fawn is for anyone who's listening is you basically do what you need to do to stay safe. But in the mind of a child, it almost feels like consent. It feels like you're saying, I'm consenting to this. And there's a lot of guilt in that. And there's a lot of guilt that nobody really talks about because, you know, it's just kind of hidden under that shame blanket. You know, and I don't know if you know that was your experience in those moments. And obviously you're saying you were dominated, so you know there's a lot going on in those small moments and those moments when you were like really thinking like, how do I get out of this? Or you know, what was it for you? Like, what was those small moments were you thinking?
Yeah, so I was completely the same. I was fawn. I was absolutely fawn, and you know, I think at my best moments, I give myself a little bit of sympathy, which is not very often. But you know, I look back now and I'm like, oh man, why didn't I fight it? Why didn't I say more? Like, why didn't I just, you know, say I'm out? Like, I'm, you know, do the flight or fight. The truth is, like, what choice do you have when you're a 6-year-old kid, right? Like, if I had gone, like, what was I going to do? Like, go out on the streets as a 6-year-old? Like, I had like no one to turn to, and so fawn was actually the safest tactic that I had in my books, right? And that's just what I had to do to survive. And one of the things that you know, I'm trying to convince myself of is that actually it's quite bloody clever, isn't it? Right? Like, if you're a small kid, to be strategizing how to survive as a 6-year-old, to be like, do you know what? I know that this man or boy is going to get fired up if I do something. It's just best if I just keep this as low key as I possibly can. Like, it's not stupid, right? Like, the human brain is actually doing what it needs to do in that moment. It'll mess you up for life, but in that moment, that's true. What we needed.
I understand. I hear what you're saying, and yes, oh my god, and so many of you know, particularly the women I talk to, they're just like, oh, why does my body do this, or why did my body betray me, or why did, you know, why did I think like this, or they beat themselves up for so long for the way that they responded when it's actually just the way that we're made. You know, and we fall into this pattern of like beating ourselves up for how we survived, and you know, you have to acknowledge that you know, like you said, how clever was that? You know, how smart were you? Like, you, and I guess that comes down, that's that definition of survival. Like, we were talking about this in the conversation the other day. We like really hate the term survivor because it's like, oh, well, I didn't die, you know, but you know, it does feel like life and death in those small moments, those repeated moments. Like, you know, every time the abuse is happening, well, what's going to happen next? Or you know, so you do what you got to do in those small moments, in those every single moments, and those small decisions, but they're massive decisions, you know, really. And you just get through. You just get through. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no, you're right. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the other thing is that you kind of, you develop other skills, right? Like, oddly, like, I'm really damn good at reading a room now. Like, walk me into a room and I'm like, good guy, bad guy, good guy, bad guy. That person, they're not paying any, but because you have to, right? Like, you have to know when's safe, when's not, when to change the tone in the room, when to shift it, when you need to exit, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's, you know, and that's just one of them. Like, I also can contain a lot of information in my head because I would walk into a room and I would do like the security surveillance, right? Like, you'd be like, this is going to happen, and then at this time, my parents are going to be going out, like the babysitter's coming in, like, this is going to be super dangerous. So this is how we're going to lay it out, right? Like, and like, it's almost like playing a game in your head. And at the time, it just made perfect sense to me. Like, I never questioned that that's not what every single other kid on the planet was doing with their time.
Yeah. And we have to acknowledge, I think, as adults, when we think back to those moments and what we did, and just be like, you know what, I actually did okay. Like, I was really brave. I was really courageous. You know, and just because for me, there was many times I thought, man, you're such a coward, Humphries. Like, fuck, why can't you just fucking tell him to get stuffed, like, piss off? And, you know, like, where's your voice? Like, you're a big tough chick. Like, you can throw hammers and discuses and hurdle barbed wire fences. I'm like, come on, why can't you, like, yell at him? Why can't you say no? You know, and I would beat the shit out of myself all the time for this, like, fear I had of, like, speaking up, you know? And we don't acknowledge, we think of ourselves, we'll see if I can get this right. As an adult, we think of ourselves as the children, but we're, like, kind of referring to ourselves as an adult. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, we kind of think, well, I should have done this and I should have done that, but how could you? You're a child.
Yeah.
You're a child. Like, and I think forgiveness is, you know, a big word, but I think the most important thing for any survivors is that self-forgiveness, is to recognize it's not your fault. You didn't do the wrong thing. That person is an adult. You are a child trying to make adult decisions about things that you're not meant to make decisions about.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this whole beating yourself up about this stuff. I mean, I don't know. That's I've spent a long time doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I one of the biggest triggers for me is just feeling really weak, right? Like, just feeling like the victim, like I was just this weak prey, right? And they could just do what they wanted, and I couldn't fight back, and I can't, like I hate that, right? Like, I hate that I didn't ever have the opportunity to change that narrative. I'd be curious to hear. I mean, you talked about, obviously, your experience was with your uncle, which is horrific. How much do you think you kept it quiet because you didn't want to bother the rest of the family?
Yes.
This is big for me.
Yes. 100%. And I could talk. We're gonna do another episode on this, people.
Sorry, I've taken us off track.
Yeah, but like it's just I'm a very oh God, now you got me going. What have you done to me? So no, but this is so true, and we don't realize it, but I really feel like predators have a type, right? And I haven't studied, like, offender psychology and that sort of stuff, but I really believe, from what I know and from the people that I've spoken to in my circle, that perpetrators of sexual violence have a type, and they prey on those who are, I won't say weak because that's not the right word, but they're kind and they're caring and they're loving and they want to give, right? And I was talking about this with Dr. Sher the other day when we were writing a course, and it was just so powerful. And it comes down to the principle of reciprocity, right? So the perpetrator who's grooming you gives you something. So what do? You obliged. You feel obliged because of who you are and how kind you are to give that person something back, right? And so you do that even as a small child, because it's embedded into your beautiful little heart and your beautiful sweet innocence, and they prey on that and take full advantage of you. And I fucking hate it. It is so wrong, but I noticed that in all these young, beautiful, like, innocent children and these wonderful adults that they've become, who share their hearts with me. You know, they're beautiful, kind souls. And when it comes down to it, I really think it's the protector in us, that protector in us, that beautiful young warrior who doesn't want to hurt mum or dad, who doesn't want to hurt his sister, doesn't want to break up that family unit. You know, they're just like, it's okay, I'll just do it. Like, I'll let him do this to me. This was me. I'll let him do this to me, and he won't touch my sister.
Yeah.
And he won't touch my brother. Not that I thought for one second he would offend against a male, but, you know, this is me being a child trying to have adult conversations with myself. You know, but I totally get that.
Yeah.
Do you remember yourself, like, thinking, if I tell my parents I'm gonna, you know, they're gonna get rid of this other person? Or
Not explicitly. I mean, I don't think that was kind of an option to get rid of them or to get, me out of the situation. I don't think that was an option, but I very much, like, I craved just their love, right? Like, as any child does. And like, I know, like, on some level I was petrified that if I told them this thing, I'd be unlovable, right? Like, I would not, it would be a bad reflection on me, and there's all the shame and there's all that kind of stuff, but also, like, I would be just a huge pain in the ass for the family, right? And that's always been, like, my thing has always been, probably related to this, I just don't like being difficult to anyone. Like, I don't even like being late to a meeting. Like, I hate that. I hate it. I hate bothering anyone. And so I think a lot of it is probably just me. I just didn't want to be difficult. And so it was just easier for me to just kind of keep it quiet and not be difficult. That seemed kind of easier, right? And then I kind of hate myself for that, because I'm just like talk about like it honestly, if I'm really, really honest about it, it feels a bit pathetic of me, right? To be like, oh, I just want them to love me, and so I won't make life difficult for anyone. Like, it's bullshit, right? Like, it's total bullshit. I know that now. If I think about Anna as a child, as you said, like, in the abstract, like, if it was any other child, like, oh my God, what I would do to disrupt that. But when I think about myself, I'm just like, oh God, Anna, seriously, shut up. Like, stop it. Just stop it. It's difficult.
Oh, I just think, I mean, how courageous are you in those moments, making those, like, we don't acknowledge it as an adult. We just, like, kind of beat the shit out of ourselves. We have these, like, internal conversations, as you're saying, but flip it. And you just have to, like, I think about my nieces and nephews, and, their beautiful, sweet little innocent faces. And I was like, oh my God, if they had to make that decision, I'd be so proud of them. I'd be so proud of them, and I often go back to that, especially if I'm having a really shit day and I can feel the self-hatred, and I'm like, oh, you know what? Just stop the roller coaster. And I have to interrupt those thoughts, because they're like a steamroller, and they just keep coming. But, I acknowledge, like, you've gone through so much stuff, and I'm thinking of, like, all these things, and, as a child, like, I know that how they've shown up in my adult life. Particularly, I don't do well with personal confrontation. Like, I'm a people pleaser. You kind of touched on it before, about, trying not to rock the boat, sort of thing. And, don't like being late for meetings. You're just kind of afraid, just to sort of be seen. And that's, it's easier to kind of hide and then to put yourself out there. I guess that's why we're both sitting here before we started this podcast going, oh my God, we're so nervous. But okay, well, we're all right. We're doing all right. But yeah, like, that whole people pleasing behavior, that's to me, like, I think of that as fawning. It's people pleasing and fawning is the same thing. So we manifest these child trauma behaviors in adulthood by kind of not being able to set those really strong boundaries and being able to say, this is my time. And I've often really struggled to have strong boundaries and to be able to say no to people and say, you know what, I can't do that. Like, I just want to help. And, you kind of just end up doing so much stuff, and you're not really looking after yourself in that. There's no self-care. I mean, what is that anyway? I don't know anything about getting my nails done. Don't own a handbag. What's a facial? I don't know. I got a man bag, all right, not a handbag. But it's got to be, self-care has to be looked at as being able to set those boundaries and being like, you know what, I'm not okay with this. And I've often found myself prior to me doing the work, and really working on my healing, is finding myself in shitty, like, relationships, or in places where I haven't been able to have a conversation and say, hey, this is not fucking working for me. Like, it's not working. I'm not okay with how you do this or this. I couldn't, because I was in that that fawning behavior, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I really struggle with that. It's still struggle. I can sit here and I can talk down some dude who's got a gun, because obviously everybody knows I'm a police officer, but not at the moment. All right. Disclaimer. But, you know, I can talk down some crazy guy on the street, or, you know, I can be absolutely peeing my pants and still be able to manage the situation in front of me. But like when I have the one-on-one with the person that's closest to me, I can't cope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think that's why you're so brave for talking about it, because not talking about it is also people pleasing, right?
Yeah.
So because
Yes.
you never want to have this conversation with anyone. Like, it's like people talk about the shame, like the shame, it's huge, right? It is enormous. But one of the reasons that, you know, I personally, and I think a lot of people don't talk about it, is because you don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable, right?
No.
Like, you sit in that room and you tell people, like, you know, when it comes up to it, and you know that they're squirming, right? They're squirming in their seat and they're uncomfortable. And it's like, again, as a people pleaser, you're like, oh, I don't really want to make them uncomfortable. So it's best I just hold it, right? Like I'll take care of this. I won't tell anyone, because I don't want to spread the pain, to be really honest. And that is one of the biggest reasons, in fact, probably the biggest reasons I haven't spoken out about this, because like there's so much fear for me about how it might affect the people around me, and how they might be perceived, or they might have, you know, just be really uncomfortable about it, right? And I don't want to spread it. And that's really hard.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're really raising it. And well, look, I'm seeing really far ahead, but my brain's not catching up to what I'm seeing. So let me try and get this right. We basically avoid talking about this to make everybody else comfortable, right? So we're kind of doing that whole people pleasing thing, but it's also really silencing. It's really silencing. It's a big reason people don't come forward. It's a big reason people don't share what's going on. It's a big reason for our mental health problem, you know. And there's lots of questions and stuff that we're going to sort of try to tackle at the end of this. But, you know, being able to have the right people in your life, people that you know that have your back, that love you unconditionally, that you can say whatever the fuck you like, and they are going to be there. They are going to love you no matter what you say. They're going to see you at your worst and love you at your best and your worst, and they're still going to be there at the end. You know, and you've got to find those people, and that's the only environment, as far as I'm concerned, it's the only environment where you're going to be able to learn to put those boundaries in place to safely go, okay, you know what, I've never been able to do this before, but I'm really scared to have this conversation with you, but, you know, can we just not do this? Or, you know, I don't really like going to bars because this is where the thing happened, you know, and having someone who's really okay with that and not going to question it and not going to be like, oh, well, why don't you just go get some fucking help? Like, I've had that happen before. It's like completely dismisses what's going on, and it's not actually acknowledging or validating the experience at all. So you've got to have the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's like a huge amount of work that also needs to kind of, it's more a messaging thing of like, how do you react when someone discloses to you, right? So we're at, you know, ICMEC in Australia, we're doing a lot of work on how do we respond when people come to us, which is happening more and more, and said, like, thank you so much for the work you do. Like, I'm a survivor. I haven't told anyone. This is kind of my story. Like, how do we respond adequately? Because I think, like, the vast majority of society don't know what to do. And to be really frank, and now I'm going to get a little bit ragey, but like, there's so much pressure. There's so much pressure on survivors to kind of speak up, right? Like, it's, yes, like, don't get me wrong, it's good. Like, it is very good. And actually, I can point you to science that says that, like, the mental and physical benefits of getting it out is actually quite profound. So it is really good, but it's hard as hell. Like, it is so hard. But there's also, like, there's very little discussion about, like, okay, so when we ask people to tell their story, how are we going to behave when they do? Right? So are we going to like turn a blind eye to this? Are we going to say, oh, that sounds bad, run, and that happens, right? Like, and one of the worst reactions you can give someone, first of all, the worst thing you can do is not believe them. Like, I tell you what, no one's making this shit up, right? Like, no one is making this up. You don't put yourself in this position for any reason, right? For any reason. And then like the other thing, you can not believe them, you can criticize them, you can also just not respond, right? Like that's also not helpful, because we have been told through our childhood, the brain is still developing when you're a child, right? It is actually developing neural pathways. And if you're consistently gaslighted through your childhood and told, we don't believe you, I don't believe you, if you tell anyone, they're not going to believe you, like you're just kind of this weak piece of whatever that I'm going to do whatever I want to. How do you think we feel when a grown adult doesn't want to hear or doesn't believe our story, right? Like I think this is a big piece, and I am so supportive of people talking out more, but I think we also need to listen, right? So it's talk and listen. It's
absolutely,
sides, right?
Yeah, and it's not trying to like fix it all the time. Where as Aussies, we like want to be helpful. Oh, well, how about this? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Most of the time, survivors look, they've had to survive and get through this whole thing, and they're pretty independent, and they're also a little bit arrogant. It's like, how dare you try to tell me how to fix this? And they automatically get really defensive. It's well, that's true for me. I'm like, hang on, what do you know about this? I'm like, so it's just one of those things. It's just like, don't try to fix it all the time. Like, really listen to see what they're asking of you. And, you might even want to pop in there and go, oh, look, I'm not really the right person for this, or because sometimes you don't have the capacity and might not be in the right space yourself. But like just say, look, how would you, do you want me to give you advice, or would you like me just to listen? Like, just fucking say it.
Yeah.
So yeah, but look, it's gosh, there's so much we can talk about. But I think one really important thing is, and I know, like, just looking at your rap sheet in the most positive and beautiful way, you've made so many like contributions to the world, to the government, to ICMEC Australia. Like, you're doing some amazing work. Like, how for you is your story and what you're doing? How does it impact?
Yeah. They're definitely related, and not necessarily just in a bad way, right? So trauma doesn't just totally mess you up and you can't do anything with it. Like, there's a huge amount of lessons and resilience, like we talked about, like reading the room and kind of, understanding a lot of information at one time. For me, like, for whatever reason, I just fluked the stars, and my survival strategy, the one thing I could control, was work, right?
Yeah.
So when I was at school, I was working, and I was super nerdy, like not in a social way, like I had heaps of friends, but I was academic. Like I liked learning, I was competitive, I liked being in the classes, and that was my focus. I could control it, and I could feel a sense of pride in what I was doing, right? Like I would work super hard. And I, that paid off. And, I did things like I went to university and did multiple degrees and had like the most amazing experiences through work and all that kind of stuff. But it was a fluke. Like it was statistically a total fluke. Like I could have gone in the complete other direction and gone into drugs and alcohol and, a whole bunch of other stuff, which is the most likely outcome. But I just fluked it, and that became the thing that became the thing that I could control, and I could work really hard at, and I could see like results, like whether it was a score or whatever. And then I just, work-wise, I made a very kind of clever, really, decision early on to be like, I don't care about the money, I don't care about the ego, I don't care about the credit, I don't care about any of that stuff. I just want to do good work. And I did a whole bunch of stuff like internationally and stuff, and just got closer and closer and closer to child protection. And there was obviously a very clear reason for that. And this job for me now feels like it's just like the universe just aligned and opened the doors and said, okay, everything you've learned, you get to do it at the thing that, like, frankly, you're not sleeping anyway, right? So you may as well be throwing your efforts towards this, which is just, I'm just so lucky, so lucky.
Yeah, right. So can you tell us a little bit about the work that ICMEC is doing?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So one of the easiest ways to explain it is we talked a lot about how, children don't or can't report this crime, right? And a lot of the kind of content that is shared of child sexual assault online is not reported by children. Often we don't even know who the victim is. We do know that, there are offenders out there and perhaps they're trading it online. So material, images, videos, all that kind of stuff. So ICMEC in Australia was launched a year ago on the back of basically a 20+ year experience for ICMEC globally. So ICMEC's been globally working all over the world. In Australia, we set up an office a year ago with a focus on online child sexual exploitation and how can we help pick up all those little digital fingerprints, right, that are left by offenders. So, I was abused in a world where it didn't relate to the internet at all. Unfortunately, now with the internet and online technology, it's a horrible playground for offenders. Like it's bloody easy to get to someone if you want to. But the flip side of that is that they do often leave digital fingerprints all over the place. So our biggest focus right now is looking at the financial transactions that offenders make. So often they'll pay particularly for live streaming of abuse of a child. So we're helping the banks to kind of pick up what's a suspicious transaction, what kind of data are we seeing out there, how do we then bring that together with law enforcement, and how do we all collaborate as a sector? So banks, law enforcement, tech companies, academics, there's amazing not-for-profits who are crawling around the dark web picking up data. We're basically compiling it to create the picture to go after these guys in the absence of children being able to report. So as I said, the guy who offended against me, he's in prison now. So law enforcement did the job for me when I couldn't. And that is exactly what motivates me today. So there's little Annas and little Kels out there who don't even know that we're trying to do something to help them. And that's pretty powerful.
Wow, yes, it is. And so needed, obviously, in this world of technological advances. And it's just so easy to get even scammed these days, my goodness. So yeah, I hate to think what's actually happening to our little people out there. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, thanks to the team. It's incredible work. I've got great people.
We're probably just going to jump on and answer a couple of questions shortly. But just before I do, I really wanted to check in with you, like how, particularly for a lot of survivors out there who've got kids, like how is that for you? How does that change the way you parent? And
that's the hardest part. So we talked about you can own the pain yourself, but the last thing you want is to spread that pain, and that's a whole different level of awfulness. So my two little ones, I am so brutally aware that I'm not giving them the childhood that I want them to have. And that's not because I'm doing anything wrong. It's because I'm hyper vigilant. These kids don't get to play in the way that kids should be able to, right? They don't get me to, be quiet when they're climbing the boulders at the park. They don't get to play in the front garden because I don't know who's driving up, right? Like it's such a battle to know that I'm holding them back in some ways. But I can't help myself on that, right? And, when I first really realized what was going on, my kids were 1 and 3, like they needed me so much. And I was there, like too much, as I said, I am helicopter parenting these kids. But I was also not really there. Like I was in the most excruciating pain. And I remember one day where it just felt so just too much. And I dropped them both at daycare and I sat in the car and I planned that I was going to go, and I planned it out, and I knew they were going to call me first, the daycare, when I didn't pick them up, because they always call the mum first because we live in that society. And then I was like, okay, so they'll call me at 6, and then they'll call my husband, and then he'll know that something's gone, but that's okay because that gives me like 8 hours, and by that point I'm like, I'm out, I'm gone. And I guess that was my flight mechanism. But like, how shit is that, right? Like, all I ever wanted to do was to have kids and to give them the childhood that I didn't get. And now I can't help but not give them the perfect childhood that I have in my dreams. So that's one of the worst things for me, I think.
Oh, bless you. I can see, obviously, I didn't want to make you upset or anything, but I just really feel there's a lot of parents out there that really struggle being a survivor themselves and having kids. And I'm going to interview my mother next week. Next fortnight. And she is a survivor herself as well. And, you know, she said, you know, I never wanted this to happen to you, you know, and I can't imagine what that's like. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I know for so many parents out there, they struggle with the very same thing. So, you know, you're definitely not alone in that. But, you know, I think your kids will be the safest kids there are. But I do believe, like, from what I know of you already, they're going to be just like so blessed and so loved and cared for and safe. And, you know, that's the best that we can hope for.
Yeah. And the thing that's really interesting too is that they have protected me. Like, the biggest reason I survived is because of them, right? Like, I don't get the option of leaving. I don't get the option of calling quits on this and them. Like, there's many days we talked about you don't sleep after you've gone through something like this. You don't sleep, and there's many days you're operating on an hour of sleep or something like that, and the kids come in and it's just like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, let's do this, guys. Like, I've got to live another day because I'm not leaving you behind. So, you know, in a way, it's kind of what you need. It's really what you need to help you survive. I think.
So what would be your message to all the mums who are survivors out there?
Oh, God.
Or dads even.
I think, like, it's the words that I would say, but I struggle with hearing myself, which is like, just be kind to yourself, right? Like, the reason you're feeling this pain is most likely because you love the hell out of these kids, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, that's the most important thing. And just be kind to yourself. Like, they're lucky to have you. And again, I say that to other people. It's harder to internalize it, but that's the truth, right? Like, the reason I get so upset about how this might affect them by osmosis is because there's no one that I want harmed less than my kids, right? Like, it's hard.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to be kind to yourself when you're so used to beating the hell out of yourself, because it's your internal dialogue, right? I've learned to really try and shut that down. As soon as I can hear myself saying that, I just say to myself, just stop what you're doing, just stop. And then I reaffirm my thinking. I have to do it. But it's constant, and it's until it becomes not constant anymore, right? And it becomes a pattern then of thinking and your mindset. Like, you know, it's train your brain, really. Like, I know it sounds very cliche, but you can do it. You can do it, and you've got to do the work. You've got to do the healing. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we will jump into some questions. I know that there's a couple of pinned here. So lovely Scott on LinkedIn has asked, how can we work on our boundaries? So what do we both do for our boundaries? So I'll start with you, Anna.
I wish I had a good answer for this one. I'm not great with boundaries, being a people pleaser, to be really honest. But there are things that I'm starting to create non-negotiables for me. So I'm trying to, for instance, because I don't sleep, I'm trying to switch off earlier from work and all that, because we're hearing this content all the time, right, at work. So I'm trying to switch off earlier, and I'm like, I'm out, I'm done. But equally, I can't go out for late dinners with people, right? Because my brain goes into trauma mode and I go really crazy and I can't sleep. So I'm getting better and better about just saying I can't do late nights and I can't do that. The other thing is for me, like the gym and exercising and running and stuff has been my way to burn off the ridiculous amounts of cortisol that are constantly churning through my body. And so I'm getting better at that, about being like, you want me to go out for a run. Like, trust me, everyone's life is going to be hell if I don't. So this is, and just finding those really, really small wins for myself to get through the day, really. But when it comes to boundaries with other people, like, I'm not great, to be really, really honest about it. I'm really not good.
So do you mean like when people ask you to do things, or?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
If you ask anyone who works with me, what's Anna's biggest fault? I reckon one of them would be like, she sucks at saying no, right? Like, she's just
so good to know this.
So ask me anything, because I will tell you, because I can't help myself, right? Like, yeah, it's hard.
Oh, it's hard, isn't it? And look, I think the process of boundaries, I kind of touched on it before, and it's got to be done, I think, in a safe space with the right people. And I think it's harder in workplaces, but I think you have to start at home where, you know, you've got the capacity and you have to be in the right environment. So, you know, it's really tough, especially for a lot of kids, you know, learning to get their body autonomy back and things like that after trauma, when they're put back into the same environment where the abuse has occurred, right? It's really tough to try and heal from that space. So, you know, it's very true. The same for survivors of domestic violence. You know, trying to set your boundaries in place when the other person is not a safe person to be able to set those boundaries in place with. You know, so to me, it's like having that conversation, saying, look, these are some of the truth, like right from the beginning. If you start dating someone, you know, it's like, look, these are the things I'm not okay with. These are my no-go zones. These are my go-go zones. And we're like, hell yeah, zones. But you know what I mean? Like, you have that conversation before you even start and just say, these are my rules. And, you know, you can change those as you go through. But I think you've got to start out from the beginning. And you've got to do the work. It's not just like being able to set boundaries, but you've got to do the healing, you've got to do the internal stuff. Because for me, like, it's taken a really long time to even speak proudly and feel like 100% confident in my own skin, where I can say with power, oh, I'm not okay with this. Because there's one thing to set a boundary and be like, oh, look, you know, I'm just kind of, you know, look, I'm maybe not really sort of like okay with that. I don't know, because any narcissistic or like manipulative person is just going to go, well, I'm just going to, you know, step all over that and fully take advantage of you. Like, when you put a boundary in place, it's a, you know, I'm talking about this in my second book that I haven't finished writing yet. I talk about it like crime scene tape, right? Like, you don't get to go past this.
Yeah.
You don't get to go past this until I say, like, your boundaries need to be firm, and only you're the only one that can move those. Like, they can, you know, allow that person to come in your boundary. So, you know, it's got to be done in a safe space. And look, it's not like there's a workshop or anything that you can sort of do, but it does start with, I guess, finding out what your vulnerabilities are, asking yourself, like, you know, where is it that I feel like when someone breaks your boundary, it's kind of like you can feel that violation. You can feel like something's not right, like even if you can't put a name to it. And I would just really encourage anyone not to dismiss that feeling. Like, really get curious about why that was so upsetting, and, you know, ask yourself, and even if you're brave enough, have the conversation with that person, just to say, look, can you just have a conversation with me about what just happened, and explore that with that person, and just say, look, you know, this, you know, is obviously something I need to do some work on. Do you mind if we don't do that until I figure it out? Like, whatever it is for you, you know. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful advice. Yeah.
Oh, stop it. Okay, cool. So trust is a big thing for me. Is that an issue for you both, Anna?
Yeah, it is. And I'm really, really trusting from the get-go, surprisingly, actually. So I actually kind of I would say sometimes I'm a bit naive, really. So I trust people a lot, but when it's broken, it's gone. Right, like it's very hard for me to come back from that. Right, so it's really surprising that I kind of go in there with that kind of like, you know, unicorns and rainbows. Like, oh, I'm sure this is a great person. They only have wonderful intent, and so I do trust people, but then like it's very hard to come back if you've broken that trust. Very, very hard. And I think that's quite problematic. Like I actually I'm not great with mistakes, and I'm not great with like just understanding that, like, you know, they probably just messed up. But I'm also like, I lose trust with people for reasons that probably I've over engineered in my head, right? So, and that's part of the shame thing, right? Like, I bet they did this thing because they don't like me, and, you know, they just like, I'm not worthy and I'm like a piece of crap and all this kind of stuff. The reality is, like, often it's just got nothing to do with me, right? Like, you know, you don't need to be so narcissistic. It's not about you, Anna. But yeah, it's just, yeah, I guess it's probably a survival thing too, right? Like if you go across that line, like the boundaries are going up. Yeah.
I'm very much, I think the police thing is harder for me because I've got these stereotypes. I don't say we don't stereotype, but you kind of have this picture of what people are, and you're very good at trusting your instinct about what a certain person is like. But I'm very much like you. I'm like, yep, whatever. I love you. Come here. I'll do anything for you. I'll give you hugs, whatever, until you burn the bridge. And it doesn't matter what anybody else has said about that person. I'm generally really like, okay, no worries, until they burn the bridge with me, and then that's it. So it has to be that personal trust is broken, not because it's been broken with somebody else. Yeah. So I guess it does manifest in me being overly trusting and not having those boundaries. What boundaries? What are they?
Isn't that interesting that we would both like walk into meeting people in relationships just like openly, like, let's go in. This has got to be safe, right? It's got to be fine. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, it's surprising. Let's say that.
We can explore this in another episode. Kel. It's yes, I'm quite intrigued, but I reckon that does deserve another conversation. Okay, what do you think the gift? What do you think is the gift because of what you've both experienced that you are here to share? Well, this can be taken a few different ways, but I think is what is your purpose, and that we're here right now doing this. I think that's what Lizzie's referring to.
I'll try if I can get the intent of the question. I mean, it might be a little bit off topic, but I think like the gift for me right now is the work that I get to do, right? Like it's just for years and years and years, I felt like I was the victim. They were coming after me. And now, you know what? Like, I feel like I flipped that narrative. Like the work we're doing, like we're going after them, right? Like we're finding, you know, all of the kind of bits of data and the digital transactions and all this kind of stuff, and we're going after them. And that feels bloody good because I think about like, if I like help one kid be safer, it's worth it. And just, it just makes the whole experience feel less like a complete waste of my life, right? Like, it has meaning now. It was for a reason, right? It was for a reason, and I pivoted it, and yes, it happened, and yes, it was shit. But like I've pivoted, and there's a reason now. There's a purpose, and that's nice, right? Like that actually feels really nice.
Yeah, I totally get that, and I guess like I've often done these things and gone, why the fuck would I just keep throwing myself on the sword? Like I've shared my story quite a few times, and I'm very grateful that I have the platform to do that now. And that's because of the support of this amazing community. Like it's been wonderful. But I get messages and I'll hear from someone who can validate that or share that experience and say, you know, I had that happen to me too. Thank you for sharing, you know. And it just makes a difference to know that the work is helping, that the work is changing lives, that people are able to put protective strategies in place for their kids now. And you know, I know that my pain has, you know, changed the family's life because their kids are now a lot safer because, you know what I mean? Like, so I will keep doing this. I'll be like old and have false teeth and I'll still be trying to do podcasts. So it is my passion and it is my purpose. So that is my gift to the world, I believe. So, and another question there from Claire is, do you find that shame represents itself in your life? I think it's called imposter syndrome, Claire Bear.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. I had this discussion earlier today. Yeah,
particularly around men. I wrote a post about this not long ago. I really struggle to present my ideas and my thoughts around particularly strong men, not because they're bad men, because they're amazing men, but I still feel like my voice doesn't matter. And it's definitely not true at all. It's just me talking myself down. But yeah, I guess that's how it shows up for me, is I sabotage my own success because of how I continue to, I don't want to say that I allow this, my uncle, my perpetrator, who is still alive, but that's okay. He does not have power and control over me. And my story does not have power and control over me, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing this, but there are moments in those small moments when it's hard or I'm tired and I don't feel like I can continue to go. Like, that's when those negative thoughts really kind of wear you down, when you don't feel like you've got the energy to fight them. And that just kind of gets buried, and then it just takes, again, you have to make those brave decisions in the moments, all the moments, every moment. And it's so fatiguing sometimes. That's why you need tribe. That's why you need to connect. That's why you need friends like Anna, and you need friends like you guys who are like, supporting this, who are there and asking questions and engaging with the content, because it makes us feel like this conversation that us sharing, it matters and it's valuable, and, it's helping, because that's what keeps us doing this. It's what keeps us showing up. All right, so we might just go with one more question, and it's from the lovely Mel. Do either of you find people asking how you work in this subject matter, given you were abused yourself? I'm asked more often than I like these days, and the question comes across very judgmental, as though there's something wrong with me for wanting to take my resilience to help others. So you can answer that, Annie. You're right in there.
That's an awesome question. And yes, I get asked it all the time. And when I was first considering, taking this job, people who knew my story were like, oh, really? Like, that's going to be pretty uncomfortable having to hear that content and know all that kind of stuff all the time. And it was a big consideration for me. I was like, oh, is this going to be too much, right? Like, can I handle this? And actually, I spoke to my friend who I mentioned before, who's the specialist in this area. And she said, actually, it can be really helpful for people to feel like they have that sense of purpose I just talked about. And that's what it's been like for me. Like, it has been really lovely to feel like I'm doing something proactively against this kind of stuff now. So that makes it worth it. But there are very, very, very hard days. And it's like this, right? Like, there are days where I've had to read a whole bunch of stories. There was one case of and I'm not going into it anywhere near what, Kel and law enforcement looks at, right? Like, I don't have to see any of that level of detail, but there is a lot of kind of content and pictures. There was one picture of a little girl who was the same age as my 2-year-old who was being sexually abused, and it messed me up for weeks. And so it's up and down. And yes, constantly getting questions about how could you do that? And my kind of response is someone has to. So, it's I think the more people who do this, the better. And for me, it's been really helpful, actually. So it's been quite a good thing.
Just if you can give one tip to anyone who's working in the industry, who's obviously it's hard. What do you do to look after yourself?
I'm increasingly flagging when it's too much, and I would say that's what I recommend the team to do too. So if anyone feels do you know what, I'm out, I just can't do this for a while. I think having the courage to say that is actually really, really important, and it's a very hard thing to say, right? When you're surrounded by 15 other people in an office who are doing the same work, you feel really weird to be like, do you know what? I can't hack it. I'm out. Like I can't. But I think we're trying to create a culture where that's a very open discussion to have. Like, and I said to the team, like, even if you want a number, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how's everyone doing today? Cool. You're at a 1. You're going home. Cool. We'll see you in a few days when you're ready. And just having that kind of vulnerability to say, this is not a good day for me, or you know what, this is like, I'm feeling good today. I reckon I can take on more. And hey, Kel, do you want me to take some stuff off you or whatever it is? And just having that like humanity and vulnerability. It's really hard to fess up when you're not handling things well. It's really hard.
It's a very big survivor's trait to say, not be able to say what you need. So that's awesome. I'm learning myself as well. So yeah, definitely being vulnerable. And a lot of people think being vulnerable is weak, but Brené Brown, if you know anything about her work, she is incredible. She tells you it's a massive pillar of strength, and I happen to agree with her. So, Anyway, guys, tonight, oh my God, Anna, it's we're already done. See, look, there goes an hour, and how quick that happens. But if you've joined us tonight, I thank you so much for being part of our very first Off the Cuff with Kel. I'm hoping to do this every fortnight, live. And then this will be uploaded by Podfire Australia to my website and streamed on all podcasting platforms. So just a couple of things, guys. There will be a Patreon account I'm setting up, so stay tuned for details about that. But again, if any of the content has triggered you guys, you can head to my website. There's a support page with lots of numbers on there. So make sure you reach out. And obviously, if you are struggling with an emergency, call 000 or your local law enforcement agency. But the live show again, ICMEC, thank you to Fran, who's in the background helping us out there. And we will see you guys in a fortnight. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.